Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about the Saturn-Uranus square on June 14th. Now, this is the second in a series of 3 squares that Saturn will be making to Uranus, and it's a very intriguing one. When we have squares like these, what happens is that there's an initial square, the first time the planets meet and square in the sky, and that was on February 17th. And that's when we have the experience of, or you might have had the experience of your world being turned upside down or inside out, which is something which happens when you have Saturn, the planet of status and conformity, consistency, and tradition, making a square to Uranus, the planet of revolution and change. So it makes sense that one would have one's expectations, staunchly held beliefs, and positions that are enforced by years of experience suddenly being thrown upside down. Now, I was thinking long and hard about an image. What would be a good image for a Saturn-Uranus square? Staunchly held beliefs, status in the world, a way of seeing things, suddenly being thrown upside down. And what I came up with was my favorite movie from 1972. Okay, yes, I was 12 years old in 1972, the year that most of your parents were born. But anyway, or maybe even before, I'm getting up in years. But anyway, in 1972, one of my favorite movies of all time came out, and it was called The Poseidon Adventure. This is the 1972 one. It's not the Kurt Russell remake, which is basically a water park, but Poseidon Adventure, the original film done by Irwin Allen with music by John Williams, was spectacular. It was wonderful. It's basically, if you haven't seen it, the story of this passenger liner, which is the SS Poseidon, which is making its last voyage from New York City to Athens, Greece, before it's going to be scrapped, as a ship. It's an old ship and it's going to be scrapped. You can already hear the Saturn images starting. It's an old ship, it's going to be scrapped. And the owner is like, make the ship go faster, don't take on ballast. We have to get to Athens by a certain time or whatever. So the ship is racing the clock to get to Athens. And what happens on New Year's Eve, and if you remember, the planet that rules that period from Christmas to New Year's Eve to mid-January is Saturn. So here it is on the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. It's this passenger line, and all the passengers are celebrating New Year's, and we're focused on the ones that are gathered at the captain's table. The captain gets a signal to come up to the bridge immediately, and he goes up to the bridge and he gets information that there's been this enormous tidal wave that's stemming from an earthquake that happened off the coast of Greece, and so the tsunami is heading in the direction of the Poseidon, this marvelous ocean liner. And in a fabulous moment of special effects, the captain looks up and the wave comes crashing over the ocean liner, and it smashes into the SS Poseidon, and it turns the whole ship upside down. It capsizes. If you've never seen this, this is one of the great film sequences from all disaster movies of all times, when the Poseidon capsizes and everyone in the ballroom is turned upside down. So you see a lot of people falling and flying over furniture and tables and things like this, and there are even ones who are clinging to the tables who are now hanging upside down from the top of the ceiling. And it's really kind of all kinds of exciting and disastrous and things like this. So basically the characters we're going to focus on are Reverend Scott, and the party that was at the captain's table. So what happens is that the world has been turned upside down. Many people have actually been killed because they fell through the skylights, and there were electricity blasts and things like that. And the Christmas tree, which was the centerpiece of the entire dining hall or whatever of the ship, is now upside down. And that's kind of become a trend recently with people having upside down Christmas trees. Anyway, they all got it from Poseidon Adventure. So what happens is that most people are like, oh my God, we went through a disaster or whatever, we've survived. We have to stay here and wait for help to come. And these are the people who are just basically subscribing to conformity. They're like, we've gone through this disaster. It's a horrible thing that's happened. We have to wait for help to come. We're helpless. We can't do anything about this. And then there's a group of people led by Reverend Scott, or Reverend Scott rather says, or deduces rather quickly, that we have to escape. We have to escape this ballroom, because if we don't, the outside pressure of the water will burst on through and it will drown everyone here. And then there's this wild debate, and people are like, well, how can we escape this ballroom? What are we escaping to? The ship is capsized. Everything's upside down. We don't know our way, and which again is a fascinating thing, because the lead character in this movie, Reverend Scott, is a holy man. And this came out in 1972, around the time of The Exorcist. And something that was very prevalent a lot in cinema were reverends or priests questioning their faith in God. And so the protagonist, or the hero of this film, is someone who questions his faith in God. In fact, his motto that he shares with a fellow reverend, an older man, is, God helps those who help themselves, which at the time I remember 1972 being, oh, who says that? But right now it's kind of like a big motto, God helps those who help themselves. So you hear a little bit of Jupiter in there. And so he's like, God helps those who help themselves. So we're not going to cower and be victims. We're going to escape. Everyone, how are we going to escape? And he's like, we're going to climb up that Christmas tree. We're going to climb up that Christmas tree, which is upside down. And because the Christmas tree is made out of metal, we use it as a ladder and we'll climb on up. And everyone's like, okay, we're climbing on up to what exactly? And he's like, he says, well, we're heading towards the propeller shaft because this kid, and he brings out Eric Shea, who's like a 9-year-old kid at the time. He's like, this kid took a tour of the ship and says, and Eric Shea says on cue, there's only 1 inch of steel at the propeller shaft. And they're like, and what does that mean? And they're like, well, if anyone comes and rescues us because we're capsized and we're still floating upside down, they're going to go to the hull of the ship and they're going to start banging around the propeller shaft because that's the least amount of steel. There's only 1 inch of steel there, so they could drill through that and rescue us. And many of the people are like, that sounds too crazy. That sounds too far-fetched. That's ridiculous. We're going to just wait here for help. So this is basically kind of what a Uranus-Saturn square does. It divides the ranks, or rather the thinking, let's take on the thinking, between the old way of thinking, or the safe way of thinking, and heading off down a path which is more far-fetched towards salvation. Okay, so there are a number of people who elect to stay. They don't think that there's going to be any sort of rescue, that they're fine upside down, or they think going to this propeller shaft is a bad idea. So they're going to wait to be rescued. And one of the people who stands to wait to be rescued is Reverend Scott's friend, who's another reverend. And he says, well, how can you stay with these people? They're gonna die. You're gonna die if you stay with them. And his fellow pastor says to him, because they're my people, and this is what we do. God doesn't only help those who help themselves. It's about being here for people who need help. And so he's a consoling presence, which is in juxtaposition to Gene Hackman's more like, I have to help myself and we have to, press forward. And so Gene Hackman gets a few other people to crawl up through the Christmas tree with him. And of course, no sooner do they get to the top of the Christmas tree than the windows of the ballroom crash open. They splatter. They crash open into shards, and the waves and the whole ocean comes bursting on through. So where you've seen these people who've been huddled and waiting for help are now being drowned, and they're all, of course, scurrying towards the Christmas tree and trying to climb up it, and the tree falls, and they die and they drown. And now our 6 castaways, for lack of a better way of putting it, kind of Gilligan's Island upside down in an ocean liner. But anyway, the 6 carry on forward. Actually, there's more than 6. I think there's like 10. But anyway, they carry on forward. And what transpires from then on is basically a game of chutes and ladders, rather elevator shafts and ladders, where Gene Hackman is leading this group of people through the ship upside down. Everything is upside down. So all the thinking has to be reversed. It all has to be rethought. And this again is the Uranus-Saturn square. It's the idea of like, I hit up against something, my expectations were overturned or aspirations capsized, and I find myself trapped in a situation where the world doesn't make sense. And do I stay holding on to something which doesn't work anymore, or do I press on into something that there's no guarantee of rescue or survival? And again, it's a fascinating tale because Reverend Scott goes from being, a sort of like radical, help yourself, type of thing, to actually becoming the shepherd of his flock. I mean, he's in charge of this group of people, and he's getting them from, the ballroom up to the propeller shaft, and all sorts of things happen, and people die at different points and things like that, as he makes this pilgrimage, as he shepherds these lost souls up to some kind of redemption. And what struck me so much about that is the Saturnian image. We talked a couple of weeks about Saturn swallowing his children, or Jonah and the belly of the whale. Here we have a story again of these survivors who are entombed in this ship, and if they stay, they will perish. And so they have to clamber up forward without any guarantee that they're going to be rescued or that they're going to be saved. There's a beautiful moment in the film. I mean, it's the heart of the film, and made me weep as a child, and it still, moves me. And there's a Jewish couple, Manny and Belle Rosen, I think are their last names, and they're traveling to Israel to see their grandson. And Belle is played by Shelley Winters, who was rather a large woman at this point when she makes the Poseidon adventure. And so, and she's getting fat jokes, thrown at her all the time, particularly by Stella Stevens, who plays an ex-prostitute, who's married to Ernest Borgnine, an ex-policeman. But anyway, there's always like, hey, fatty, can you I mean, she's getting shamed, and it's really, and she takes it in good stride. And so there's a moment where they have to swim under a shaft to get to another part of the ship in order to clamber on up to get to the propeller shaft. And Gene Hackman, playing Reverend Scott, goes first. There's a trembling in the ship, because there's always trembling in the ship because it's gradually sinking. And a wall of metal falls down, and it pins him underwater in this shaft. I mean, for anyone who's claustrophobic, because it's like nightmare, and he can't get up and he's starting to drown. Well, Shelley Winters says to the other people, let me go and get him, because they realize he hasn't come back or made it to the other side, because he was supposed to pull on the line. And she's like, let me go see. And they're like, you can't, you're too fat. She's like, well, I used to be, a star athlete swimmer. I might be a fat girl on the surface, but in the water, I swim like a fish. And it's like the best moment, because you see, and she's got this like 70s hairdo and everything. It's the best moment. You see her like dive into the water with a big splash, but she swims on down, and the actors and actresses did their own stunts in this movie. She swims on down, and she sees Gene Hackman pinned under the metal, and she helps him to release the metal. And so he's able to swim out. And they get to the other side, which proves that, everyone can then follow. But at that moment, she, has a heart attack and she dies. And because it was too much strain on her and her body weight and things like this. And she's there dying. And he's like, and at this point, Reverend Scott's really angry at God. He's like, how many more people have to die for you? And things like this. He's blaming everything on God, not just on the fact that it's a disaster. But she turns to him and she gives Reverend Scott a high medallion, a high medallion that she's wearing around her neck. It's a high medallion. And high, of course, is the Jewish symbol of life. And she says, give this to my husband, Manny, to give to my grandson in Israel. And it's just so heartbreaking when she says that. And then she dies, and he cradles her, and then he swims back and he brings everyone through, and they come through and they see that she's the one who had died and had perished. And it's so, and Manny won't leave her side. And at that point, Reverend Scott gives Manny the medal, the high medal, and says, she said her last words, give this medal, give this symbol of life to your grandson in Israel. That's what she wanted most of all. And so he reluctantly leaves his wife's side. And then, of course, at the climax of the film, there's a pipe that opens and hot steam coming through, and it's right on this door, and that's the door they need to get through to get to the propeller shaft and things like that. And Gene Hackman, okay, this reverend who's angry at God and angry at life and sees himself as a renegade and a rebel. In fact, he's on his way to Africa because he's been relocated by the church because he's been such a pain in the ass and such a rebel, and he preaches this God that helps those who help themselves gospel. He's the one who jumps on and onto this wheel, right, which can close the steam shaft but underneath him, there was no stairs, no landing, no anything. There's just water and gasoline on the water that's lit on fire. I mean, it's this image of complete hell. Okay, and he's there gripping the wheel. And he looks at the rest of the survivors, the remaining one, and it's about six. There's about six of them at this point. And he locks eyes with them. And he realizes in that moment, even though he's angry at God and the universe, but he also realizes at that moment, this is my flock. This is the group of people that I'm in charge of, and I have to get them to the other side. Like all religious figures, I have to get them through the desert. I have to get them through the sea. I have to get them through the disaster. I have to get them through the wasteland. It's my job to get them to the other side. And so he achingly, and it's searing the heat, he achingly, closes the valve so that the steam stops. And in that moment, when the steam stops and they can clearly go ahead, from exhaustion and from pain, he falls down into, this hellish landscape, and of course, and he dies. But the result of this heroic sacrifice, and there was nothing remotely sacrificial about this character at the beginning of the movie, and he's a reverend. But the result of it is that the rest of them do survive. They get up to the propeller shaft. They're like, now what do we do? And they hear clanging, and it's actually the rescue ship that has come. And just as the boy, Eric Shea, had predicted, we're looking for survivors and clanging on it. They yell, the drill is through, and then they're rescued and they're received. They're rescued from the belly of the whale. They're rescued from the belly of Saturn. But what I find so pertinent or relevant about all of this is the question. Remember, this is the second of three squares. It's a retrograde square. Okay, one of the planets is retrograde and they're squaring again. And then the third square in December 24th, will be the final square between Saturn and Uranus. So the question that I want to present to you this week is, where are you in your journey? Where are you in your Poseidon adventure journey? Okay, your world has been turned upside down. The rules have changed. I'm not saying that you're living with a disaster or anything like that, although some of you might have gone through things that are more dramatically earth-shaking, okay? But for most of us, the world is upside down. The old rules don't apply. So do we go back and wait for the world to return to normal? And the idea is that it doesn't, but even if it does return to normal, like for instance, we're let out of lockdown and economy's back up and things like that, it's still not the same world it was before. Okay, so do we try to go back to the world that we knew before, or do we press on? Do we press on and climb these upside down Christmas trees and navigate these elevator shafts and walk around rooms where things are hanging upside down? And do we confront hot steam blowing on the door that we need to get through in order to be rescued, with no guarantee, with no known guarantee that that's even what's going to happen? So at this point, the question is, where are you in this journey? How are you doing? Have your beliefs changed? Have your convictions changed? Are you disillusioned, or have you been released from disillusionment and disappointment? Is there a kind of liberation that's come through because things have been turned upside down? Or are you still struggling? Are you still, trying to find your way? And this idea of trying to find your way is very much in keeping with the Saturn-Uranus square. And it's very much in keeping that also this week, Jupiter will be turning retrograde in the zodiac sign of Pisces. So ask yourself these questions, and don't assume that you know your way, and don't try to look for familiar landmarks, but be open to the next heroic act. Find the people that are your flock. Be true to your fellow pilgrims. Be true to your fellow pilgrims that are traveling the path with you, because even though things may feel lost or wayward or meandering, they are still leading you to that 1 inch of steel that separates you from the belly of the ship and the grand horizon of the world that awaits you on December 24th, when Saturn and Uranus square for the final time.